Power does not reveal a person when it is gained. It reveals them when they believe no one can take it away. The Gulfstream G700 waited on the private FBO apron like a silver promise, its auxiliary power unit humming low beneath the pale Monday morning sky. Beyond the glass wall of the terminal lounge, men in charcoal suits checked encrypted phones, assistants whispered over leather folders, and a tray of untouched espresso cooled beside a vase of white orchids. Naomi Whitfield Cross arrived without hurry, her cream wool coat resting over one arm, her dark silk suit immaculate, her posture so composed that even the security director straightened when she passed. She looked expensive in the quietest way. Bennett Cross stood near the boarding stairs with one hand in his pocket, smiling for the small circle of investors who had come to witness his departure for New York. Today was supposed to close a merger large enough to bend headlines by noon, and Bennett loved mornings like this, when the world seemed arranged around his schedule, his aircraft, his signature. Celeste Waverly stood beside him in a white cashmere coat, blonde hair pinned perfectly, one manicured hand already resting on the rail of the jet stairs as if the aircraft had been waiting for her personally. Naomi noticed the hand first. She noticed everything. The flight operations manager approached with a tablet, his face tight in the way employees looked when a billionaire had ordered them to do something that felt wrong but sounded official. Bennett did not turn when Naomi reached them. He kept smiling at the investors, kept performing control, kept letting the low hum of the auxiliary power fill the silence he had created. Then he said, lightly, almost kindly, "Naomi, there has been a change of plans." A small sentence can become a knife without ever raising its voice. The operations manager lowered his eyes and showed her the passenger manifest. Bennett Cross, Celeste Waverly, 2 senior partners, 1 tax counsel, 1 aviation liaison. Naomi's name had been removed. Not delayed, not rescheduled, not marked pending. Removed. Celeste's smile widened by a fraction, delicate enough to seem accidental, cruel enough for Naomi to understand it completely. Bennett finally looked at his wife, and in his expression was the careless confidence of a man who mistook public embarrassment for private victory. "This is a business flight," he said. "I need people on board who are essential to the deal." The investors pretended to study their watches. The pilot looked toward the wing. The smell of expensive black coffee drifted from the lounge behind them, bitter and warm against the clean jet fuel in the morning air. Naomi held the tablet for 1 second longer than necessary. 1 second was enough. She did not ask Celeste to step down. She did not ask Bennett to explain himself. She did not lift her voice, did not reach for his arm, did not give the waiting men the scene they expected from a humiliated wife at the edge of a private FBO apron. Her dignity did not need witnesses. Naomi handed the tablet back to the operations manager and turned her wedding ring once with her thumb, a small movement hidden beneath the sleeve of her coat. Bennett mistook it for pain. Celeste mistook it for defeat. But somewhere beneath Naomi's calm face, behind the stillness Bennett had spent years underestimating, a clause in a black legal folder had just become alive. She looked at him at last and said, "Are you sure this is how you want to record the morning?" Bennett laughed softly, as if she had asked about the weather. "It is already recorded," he said, nodding toward the manifest. Naomi gave one slow nod. "Yes," she replied. "It is." Then she stepped away from the aircraft, past the investors, past the glass lounge, past the marble counter where the untouched espresso sat cooling in porcelain cups, and into the waiting town car. Behind her, the Gulfstream's auxiliary power unit continued to hum with borrowed authority. For now, the town car door closed with a soft hydraulic seal, shutting out the apron noise as if the world outside had been placed behind glass. Naomi sat alone in the back seat, one gloved hand resting over the leather portfolio on her lap, her face reflected faintly in the tinted window. Beyond the terminal, Bennett was still smiling, still moving through handshakes, still believing that the morning had proven what he wanted everyone to see. He had mistaken access for ownership. The Gulfstream's auxiliary power unit carried across the apron in a deep metallic purr, the kind of sound that made investors feel safe and employees speak carefully. Bennett had built an entire identity around that sound, around private hangars, priority customs lanes, cabin crews who knew his preferred whiskey, and pilots who did not ask questions when Celeste's luggage appeared beside his. To him, the aircraft were not machines. They were proof that every room, every apron, every signature eventually bent toward his name. He loved proof he did not have to read. Inside the jet, Celeste settled into the forward leather seat Naomi usually occupied during business flights. She crossed her legs, accepted sparkling water and crystal, and glanced at the cream blanket folded beside her as if inheritance could be claimed by touching fabric. Bennett watched her with a private satisfaction, the satisfaction of a man who thought humiliation was cleaner when performed politely. He had not only removed Naomi from a flight, he had rearranged the meaning of the aircraft in front of witnesses. That was the cruelty. In the car, Naomi's phone lit up with a message from the flight operations manager. Mrs. Cross, I apologize for the change. The manifest was amended under Mr. Cross's instruction. She read it once, then let the screen go dark. No reply. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, but her expression gave him nothing to interpret. Outside, the FBO fencing slid past in silver lines, and the morning sun struck the hangar glass with a cold corporate brightness. Naomi opened the leather portfolio. The first page was not emotional, not theatrical, not written in the language of marriage. It was an operating memorandum stamped with the name Whitfield Aviation Foundation, dated 7 years earlier, filed through 3 layers of counsel and countersigned by Bennett Cross himself in blue ink. Paper remembers what pride forgets. Bennett had signed it during a summer expansion when fuel costs were rising, insurance underwriters were nervous, and a failed partner had nearly exposed the fleet to debt liability. Naomi had been the one to call the tax counsel, the risk advisor, the trust attorney, and the aviation compliance team into a mahogany boardroom that smelled of black coffee and polished wood. Bennett had arrived late, kissed her cheek for the room, and signed where she pointed while telling 2 bankers he trusted his wife with domestic details. He had laughed when he said it. She had not corrected him. That was Naomi's discipline. She never interrupted a man while he was documenting his own blindness. Her phone rang. Bennett's name appeared. She let it ring twice before answering. You upset? He asked, the background filled with soft cabin movement and Celeste's faint laugh. Naomi looked down at the page bearing his old signature. No, he paused, surprised by the absence of anger. Good. Because this is business, Naomi. You understand that, right? She turned 1 page. I do. Then don't make it personal. Her eyes settled on the clause titled Operational Risk Authority. You did. The silence after that was longer than Bennett expected. For a moment, even the confidence in his breathing changed. Then he gave a short laugh, the kind men use when they sense a door has shifted but refuse to admit the room is locked. I'll see you tonight, he said. Naomi closed the folder with one quiet movement. No, she ended the call before he could turn confusion into command. The town car moved away from the FBO and toward the private counsel's tower, where brass plaques gleamed beside unmarked doors and decisions worth billions were made in rooms with no cameras. Behind her, the jet still waited for clearance. Ahead of her, the black folder rested calmly on her lap, heavier than any suitcase Bennett had allowed on board. The private counsel's tower was only 12 minutes from the FBO, but it belonged to a different kind of power. There were no cameras outside the limestone buildings, no golden logos on the doors, no receptionists trained to flatter men who arrived with photographers and noise. Naomi stepped from the town car beneath a narrow black awning, her heels touching the stone with the quiet certainty of someone entering a place where signatures mattered more than status. This was where empires stopped pretending. Inside, the elevator rose without music. Its mirrored walls reflected Naomi in pieces, the smooth line of her suit, the pearl studs at her ears, the black folder held against her ribs, the calm face of a woman who had already moved past embarrassment and into execution. On the 23rd floor, a private conference room waited with one wall of frosted glass, one long table of dark mahogany, and a silver tray holding fresh black coffee, so strong its bitterness seemed almost legal. The room smelled like consequences. Evelyn Marlowe was already there. She stood beside the table in a slate gray suit, silver hair pinned low, reading glasses resting at the end of one hand, a fountain pen with a gold nib placed exactly parallel to a stack of documents. Evelyn did not rush toward Naomi with sympathy. She did not ask whether the morning had hurt. She had spent 30 years watching powerful men confuse charm with control, and she knew that when Naomi came to her with silence, the matter had already become enforceable. Naomi placed the black folder on the table. Evelyn opened it without a word. The first document was the Fleet Operating Trust Agreement, followed by the Aviation Insurance Riders, the Beneficial Control Certificate, the Board Resolution, and a Risk Authority Clause drafted in language so precise it could hold an aircraft without raising a voice. Bennett's signature appeared on page 7, then page 11, then page 19. Pride had been very thorough. Evelyn lifted her eyes. Did he remove you from the manifest? Naomi removed her gloves. Yes. Did he replace you with an unapproved passenger? Yes. Was this tied to a pending corporate transaction? Naomi looked toward the window, where the city shimmered behind glass, all towers and distance. Today, Evelyn's expression did not change, but her hand moved to the gold-nibbed pen. The scratch of it against the first authorization sheet was small, almost delicate, yet it carried more force than the auxiliary power still humming on the FBO apron. She slid a second document toward Naomi, the activation notice for the Operational Risk Authority. It required one final confirmation from the controlling trustee. Naomi read only the top line. She knew the rest because she had written its structure before Bennett ever learned how useful it would be to ignore her. Some traps are not built in anger, they are built in foresight. Her phone vibrated again. This time the screen showed 3 missed calls from Bennett, one from his chief of staff, and a message from Celeste asking whether Naomi wanted her driver sent away from the terminal. Naomi looked at the message for half a second. Then she placed the phone face down beside the coffee. No reply. Evelyn watched her. Once signed, the fleet enters immediate administrative hold. No aircraft can depart until the insurer, trustee office, and trust compliance committee release them. Naomi picked up the fountain pen. Good. Bennett will call this sabotage. Naomi signed the first page, the gold nib gliding over the thick paper with a soft, final sound. He signed it. Evelyn turned another page. He will claim he did not understand the provision. Naomi signed again. He should have. Evelyn allowed the smallest pause, not quite a smile, not quite approval. Then she placed a sealed envelope at the center of the table, addressed to Bennett Cross, marked hand delivery, legal priority. It contained the notice that would reach the FBO apron before the aircraft reached clearance. Naomi stood. She did not look triumphant. Triumph was too loud for what this was. What she felt was cleaner, colder, and older than anger. The return of a name to its rightful place on paper. Outside the conference room, an associate waited to transmit the hold order to flight operations, underwriters, and the compliance liaison. Inside, the coffee continued steaming untouched. Naomi looked at Evelyn. Send it. Evelyn nodded once, lifted the envelope, and the first aircraft Bennett still thought of as his became nothing more than polished metal waiting for permission it no longer had. The hold order reached the FBO apron before Bennett finished his first glass of sparkling water. It arrived without drama, first as a quiet alert on the captain's tablet, then as a second confirmation from flight operations, then as a sealed instruction from legal compliance that made the co-pilot stop moving entirely. Outside the oval window, the wing remained still against the bright morning, elegant and useless beneath the clean sky. The aircraft was ready, but permission had vanished. Bennett noticed the change before anyone spoke. Powerful men often sense obedience leaving the room before they understand why. The captain stepped from the cockpit with professional caution, his navy jacket buttoned, his face arranged into the neutral expression used around clients who believed money could rewrite procedure. Celeste looked up from her phone, annoyed by the delay but not yet frightened by it. Bennett leaned back in Naomi's usual seat, one ankle over the other, still wearing the easy impatience of a man who expected every obstacle to dissolve when he spoke. He had not yet learned this one had paper behind it. Why are we still on the ground? Bennett asked. The captain held the tablet with both hands. We've received an administrative hold from flight operations. Bennett laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because his pride needed a sound. Then call flight operations. They confirmed it, sir. Then call the management company. They are copied, sir. Celeste uncrossed her legs. The crystal glass in her hand looked suddenly too delicate for the room. Bennett stood, his tailored suit sharp beneath the cabin lights, and walked toward the galley as if physical movement might restore authority. Through the open aircraft door, He could see the ground crew removing the final luggage cart, not loading it. Beyond them, one of the investors had stepped away to take a call. The morning was beginning to turn against him in small, expensive ways. On the apron, the boarding stairs remained fixed in place. No one wanted to touch them. Bennett called his chief of staff, then his aviation director, then the head of operations, each conversation shorter than the last. Their answers came wrapped in caution, legal hold, trustee notification, insurance restriction, compliance review. He kept asking who gave the order, and every pause before the answer insulted him more deeply than the answer itself. No one wanted to say her name first. Inside the private legal office across town, Naomi stood beside the mahogany table while an associate confirmed transmission receipts from every required channel. Insurer acknowledged. Trustee office acknowledged. Trust compliance committee acknowledged. Flight operations acknowledged. Evelyn read each line aloud in a voice so calm it made the process feel less like revenge than weather. Naomi looked at the city through the frosted glass. All aircraft, Evelyn asked the associate. All active tail numbers, ma'am. Naomi turned back. Good. That was all. At the FBO apron, Bennett stepped down from the jet with his phone pressed hard against his ear. The engine noise had changed. What had once sounded like dominance now sounded like money burning without motion. The investors watched from near the lounge windows, their faces composed but withdrawn, already calculating what delay meant for the New York closing, the acquisition timetable, the lender confidence, the headlines that would not say panic but would smell like it. Bennett hated their silence most. Celeste came down behind him, one hand gripping the rail, her earlier smile gone. She looked toward the terminal, expecting someone to fix the inconvenience for her, but the employees had become careful with their eyes. The flight operations manager approached, carrying a printed notice on heavy paper. Bennett reached for it before the man could speak. His gaze moved over the words administrative hold, operational risk authority, beneficial control, immediate effect. Then he saw the line that mattered. Authorized by Naomi Whitfield Cross. For a moment, the apron seemed too wide around him. He called her again. This time, Naomi answered from the legal office, where the signed authorization lay flat beneath Evelyn's hand. Release my plane, Bennett said, each word sharpened by the belief that command still mattered. Naomi looked at the page bearing his old initials beside the risk authority clause. Read the notice. The line went silent. Bennett stared at the printed words again, but they did not soften for him. Behind him, the Gulfstream sat bright and polished in the sun, a symbol with no clearance left inside it. The legal notice trembled only because Bennett's hand refused to stay still. He stood at the bottom of the boarding stairs with the Gulfstream behind him, the investors behind the glass, and Celeste close enough to hear every word, but no longer close enough to touch his sleeve with confidence. The FBO apron that had always made him look untouchable now made him look exposed, a man surrounded by expensive machinery that would not obey him. Silence had become the loudest person there. A black sedan entered through the private service gate and moved slowly along the apron, its windows dark, its pace measured, its arrival too formal to be mistaken for an apology. The flight operations manager stepped aside before it stopped. Evelyn Marlowe emerged with a sealed envelope in one hand and a slim leather folio in the other, her slate gray suit untouched by the wind, her silver hair pinned with courtroom precision. She looked like a document given human form. Bennett turned toward her with relief first, then anger, because he still believed lawyers existed to repair the consequences of powerful men. Evelyn, he said, forcing control back into his voice. Tell them this is a mistake. She stopped at a respectful distance, not close enough for intimacy, not far enough for evasion. It is enforceable. Bennett's jaw tightened. I own this fleet. Evelyn opened the folio to the dispatch release page. You operate it conditionally. Celeste blinked. One sentence had lowered her from passenger to liability. Evelyn handed Bennett the sealed envelope, but he did not open it at once. He stared at her as if she had betrayed him personally, as if the woman who had spent years warning him to read before signing had ambushed him with his own name. Around them, ground crew members pretended to check equipment that no longer needed checking. The captain stood near the aircraft door, hands folded, waiting not for Bennett's order but for trustee clearance, insurer confirmation, and a valid certificate of coverage. Authority had changed uniforms. Bennett tore open the envelope and scanned the first page, then the second, then the signature block. His face shifted in careful stages: disbelief, irritation, calculation, then the first visible edge of fear. The notice did not accuse him of infidelity. It did not mention Celeste, humiliation, marriage, or insult. It spoke only the language he could not charm: insurance exposure, unauthorized manifest alteration, fiduciary risk, trustee control, administrative suspension, immediate fleet-wide restriction. The paper did not care what he felt. "This is absurd," Bennett said. "Naomi cannot ground aircraft used for corporate operations." Evelyn turned one page in her copy. "She can." "On what authority?" "The authority you signed." The investors behind the glass had stopped pretending not to watch. One of them lifted his phone and stepped farther away, already calling New York. Another spoke quietly to tax counsel, whose expression had gone flat and professional. Bennett saw the deal beginning to loosen, thread by thread, not because a competitor had beaten him, not because the market had turned, but because his wife had touched one buried clause and the machinery of his life had stopped moving. Pride is most fragile when it discovers paperwork. Celeste leaned toward Bennett and whispered, "Can we take another jet?" Evelyn heard her. Everyone heard her. She looked at Celeste with no cruelty at all, which made the answer colder. "No aircraft under the trust may depart." Celeste's mouth closed. The white cashmere coat suddenly looked borrowed. Bennett pointed toward the hangar where 3 other aircraft sat beyond the security line. "Those are mine too." Evelyn held his gaze. "Also conditional." He called Naomi again, this time on speaker without realizing how desperate that made him look. She answered after one ring. "Undo this," he said. There was no background noise on her end, only the faint stillness of a private office. "No. You are embarrassing me in front of my partners. You began in public." Bennett looked toward the lounge, where no one rushed to defend him. Evelyn slipped the folio shut. "Mr. Cross, until the trustee office and trust compliance committee complete review, you have no authorization to dispatch, board, reposition, lease, or privately access any aircraft in the fleet." The words landed one by one, clean and final. The auxiliary power behind him wound down. That was the sound that broke him first. Not Naomi's anger, because she had offered none. Not Celeste's silence, because it was already turning into self-preservation. It was the dying hum of the Gulf Stream, the fading mechanical breath of the privilege he had used to humiliate his wife, now leaving him on the same ground where he had left her. Bennett did not return to the terminal lounge. He went straight to the boardroom because that was where he believed humiliation could still be converted back into command. The private elevator carried him up 42 floors above the city, past marble walls, silent security badges, and framed magazine covers that had once called him a visionary. By the time the doors opened, his face had recovered its public shape, but his eyes had not. The room knew before he spoke. The boardroom table was cold mahogany, long enough to make even wealthy men feel arranged rather than seated. Fresh legal binders waited at every place setting, each one marked with a discreet silver tab, each one smelling faintly of paper, ink, and expensive restraint. A row of directors and investor representatives sat beneath the muted glow of recessed lights, their watches hidden under cuffs, their phones face down, their silence heavier than accusation. No one asked about the flight. Bennett entered first, Celeste behind him, though she stopped near the wall when she realized no chair had been prepared for her. Evelyn was already at the far end of the table with the folio open, and beside her sat outside counsel from New York, a thin man with rimless glasses who looked as if he billed by the breath. Naomi's chair remained empty. That bothered Bennett more than her presence would have. He took the head seat and placed both hands flat on the table, reclaiming the pose cameras had made famous. "This meeting is now about governance," he said. "We have a rogue internal actor interfering with corporate operations." No one nodded. That was the first injury. Bennett looked toward Evelyn. "Prepare a motion to remove Naomi from all operational authority connected to the fleet, the foundation, and any related trust structure." Evelyn did not move her pen. "You do not have unilateral authority to do that." "Then call a vote." "The voting rights are restricted." "By whom?" Evelyn looked at the binders. "By the documents." The room stayed still. Somewhere near the center of the table, a director turned a page with the care of a person handling evidence. Bennett's mouth tightened, but But he continued, because men like him often believed momentum could become legality if spoken loudly enough. He accused Naomi of overreach. He accused legal of panic. He accused compliance of misunderstanding commercial urgency. He reminded the board of the New York deal, the lender schedule, the acquisition timeline, the press cycle, the cost of appearing unstable before noon. Every phrase sounded powerful until it reached the paper in front of them. Paper did not flatter him. The door opened without announcement. Naomi entered in the same dark silk suit, her coat now gone, the black folder resting in one hand. She did not look at Celeste. She did not search the room for allies. She walked to the empty chair opposite Bennett and sat as if the room had been waiting for the person who understood the documents. Bennett leaned back with a sharp smile. Finally, Naomi placed the folder on the table. The record is here. The sentence was calm enough to make his anger look undisciplined. He pointed at her as if the gesture could reduce her to a defendant. You grounded a corporate fleet to punish me over a personal disagreement. Naomi opened the folder to a marked page. False. He laughed, but nobody followed him. False. She slid the page toward Evelyn. Unauthorized passenger. Altered manifest. Transaction risk. 3 facts. No performance. Evelyn adjusted her glasses and read from the clause, her voice even, each sentence landing with the weight of something already agreed to long before anyone in the room cared to remember. The trust permitted immediate suspension if aircraft use created legal, insurance, reputational, or fiduciary exposure during a pending transaction. Bennett's signature appeared beneath the provision. His initials appeared beside the writer. His approval appeared in the board minutes. The room grew colder around him. Bennett stared at the page as if the ink might rearrange itself out of loyalty. I signed hundreds of documents that year, he said. Naomi looked at him across the table. You signed this one. A shareholder at the left end closed his binder softly. Another director removed his glasses and looked away. Celeste shifted near the wall, suddenly aware that she had entered a room where beauty had no voting rights. Bennett turned to the outside counsel. Can this be challenged? The lawyer folded his hands. Not before the New York closing window. That was the second injury. Bennett's empire had not exploded. It had simply stopped responding in front of witnesses. Naomi rested her hands on the table, still, elegant, unhurried. Bennett's voice dropped. You planned this. She looked at the old signature on the page, then back at him. You made it necessary. The silence after that belonged to her. Evelyn opened the largest binder, the one with the silver tab marked beneficial control, and the sound of the cover lifting seemed to change the temperature of the room. Bennett sat very still now, not calm, but disciplined by the realization that every outburst made him look smaller before people who measured weakness in basis points and voting percentages. Naomi remained opposite him, hands folded near the black folder, her expression neither wounded nor pleased. She did not need emotion to win ownership. Evelyn began with the foundation charter, then the trust schedule, then the aircraft holding company agreements that Bennett had once described in interviews as strategic family infrastructure. Each document revealed another layer of what he had never bothered to understand. The fleet was not held by his personal estate, not freely controlled by his executive office, not available for private indulgence whenever his pride required spectacle. The aircraft moved through Whitfield Aviation Foundation Authority, insured under a risk-controlled operating trust, governed by a trustee structure that placed Naomi as the final protective signatory. His name was visible. Hers was decisive. A director at the far end leaned closer to his binder. The New York counsel wrote something on a yellow legal pad. Celeste stood near the wall, arms crossed tighter now, her white cashmere coat no longer reading as luxury, but as evidence that she had walked into a system where she owned nothing, authorized nothing, and understood even less. Bennett looked from face to face, searching for the old reflex, the automatic loyalty men gave him when his private jet waited outside. No one offered it. Wealth is not the same as control when the signature belongs to someone else. This structure was created to protect the company from reckless individual use, Evelyn said. It was approved unanimously. Bennett's gaze snapped toward the board. Because it was presented as a tax and liability shield. Evelyn turned a page. It is. Not a weapon. Naomi looked at him. A boundary. The word landed cleanly. Bennett's nostrils flared. but he could not argue with it without admitting why the boundary had been crossed. Evelyn continued, naming the violations with the sterile precision of corporate truth. Unauthorized manifest change, unapproved non-business passenger on a transaction-related flight, removal of a controlling trustee from scheduled corporate travel, reputational exposure during a pending merger, and potential breach of insurance disclosure requirements. None of it sounded like heartbreak. That made it worse for him. If Naomi had cried, Bennett could have called it emotional. If she had shouted, he could have called it unstable. If she had accused Celeste, he could have turned the room into gossip and survived the afternoon as a wronged executive under domestic pressure. But Naomi gave him no smoke to hide inside. She gave him paper. One of the investors pushed his chair back. "We need to pause New York," he said quietly. The sentence moved through the room like a closing door. Another partner stood, gathered his phone, and asked outside counsel to prepare a disclosure note before lenders heard about the grounding from operations channels. A third director requested an independent review of Bennett's discretionary use of foundation assets. Nobody looked at Celeste when they said discretionary use, but everyone understood who had made the word necessary. Her face went pale under perfect makeup. Bennett stared at them as if betrayal had become contagious. "You are all overreacting," he said. Evelyn glanced at the active agenda. "They are complying." He turned to Naomi. "Tell them this is temporary." Naomi held his eyes. "It is documented. Tell them I still control the company. Not this." The third injury was not the legal hold. It was the narrowing of his kingdom in public. Bennett could still own towers, accounts, headlines, and board seats, but the part of his life he had used as theater, the polished aircraft, the private stairs, the cabin where he had replaced his wife with a mistress and called it business, had been removed from his command with ceremonial cleanliness. Evelyn slid the beneficial control certificate across the table. Its embossed seal caught the recessed light. Bennett looked at Naomi's name printed above the controlling authority line, elegant and immovable. For years, he had thought her silence meant she was standing behind him. Now the room understood she had been standing beneath the empire, holding the beams. Naomi rose slowly, not to leave yet, but to end the illusion. Bennett's voice was lower now. "What do you want?" She closed the black folder. The truth on paper. It was the cruelest answer because it asked for nothing he could buy back. Naomi did not raise her voice when the room began to rearrange itself around her authority. She remained standing beside the mahogany table while Evelyn distributed the next packet of documents, each page moving from hand to hand with the soft whisper of a verdict. Bennett watched the directors read in silence, watched outside counsel underline clauses, watched the investors who had once laughed at his private jokes now study the paper as if distance from him had become a financial strategy. The execution had begun without ceremony. Evelyn placed a resolution before the board. Temporary transfer of fleet oversight to an independent compliance committee, suspension of Bennett's discretionary aircraft privileges, review of all non-business passengers, immediate freeze on aviation expense accounts, and removal of unauthorized access credentials from hangars, lounges, and private booking systems. The language was clean, administrative, almost boring. That was what made it brutal. Bennett pushed back from the table. "You cannot strip me of access to my own infrastructure." Evelyn looked at the resolution. "We can restrict trust assets." He turned to Naomi, trying to find the wife he knew how to dismiss. "This is revenge." Naomi met his eyes. "This is governance." A director at the left end cleared his throat and asked whether the suspension included guest privileges. Evelyn answered yes. Celeste's face changed so quickly that even her attempt to hide it became visible. Her hand moved toward the diamond bracelet at her wrist, then stopped, as if she had suddenly understood that luxury could be worn without belonging. No one offered her a chair. Bennett looked toward her, perhaps expecting loyalty, but Celeste was staring at the resolution now, reading the part that removed all unauthorized passenger approvals pending review. She had arrived as proof of his power. She was leaving as evidence of his risk. Naomi signed the first transfer authorization. The gold-nibbed fountain pen touched the paper with a delicate scratch, and the sound carried across the room more clearly than Bennett's objections. Then she signed the hangar access restriction, the expense freeze, the dispatch protocol update, and the notice to the aviation management company. Each signature removed something Bennett had used to feel inevitable. The room did not applaud. It did not need to. On a secure screen mounted near the wall, the operations dashboard updated in real time. Active tail numbers shifted from available to administrative hold. Crew scheduling moved to suspended dispatch. VIP lounge access changed from executive open to trustee review. Fuel authorization paused. Repositioning approval paused. Personal booking privileges paused. Bennett watched his life become a list of denied permissions. It was quieter than collapse should have been. Across town, in the private terminal, key cards stopped opening the executive lounge. A hangar manager received instructions to change access codes before evening. An aviation accountant locked 3 spending accounts tied to Bennett's personal travel. A scheduling coordinator removed Celeste Waverly from every future passenger note attached to Foundation aircraft. No one shouted when the Empire corrected itself. Bennett's chief of staff entered the boardroom halfway through the process, pale and breathing too carefully. He bent toward Bennett and whispered that New York had requested a delay. The lenders wanted clarification, and one partner had asked whether Bennett would remain the principal contact on the acquisition. Bennett stared straight ahead. The question wounded him more than the grounding. Men who lived by being indispensable suffered most when others discovered procedure could replace them. Naomi closed the final authorization and slid it to Evelyn. "File it." Evelyn nodded. Immediately, Bennett rose too quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You think this makes you powerful?" Naomi picked up the black folder. "No." He waited, breathing hard through his nose. She buttoned her suit jacket with one calm movement. The documents already did. The sentence left no opening. Celeste stepped away from the wall, but Bennett did not look at her now. His attention remained fixed on Naomi, because the humiliation he had designed for the runway had returned with interest, stripped of noise, and dressed in legal language. He had wanted the world to see that she could be left behind. Now the board had seen that he could be left without clearance, without allies, without aircraft, without the privileges he confused for ownership. Naomi turned toward the door. Not fast, not dramatic, just finished. Behind her, Evelyn began collecting signatures from the remaining directors, and one by one, the people who used to wait for Bennett's permission began acting without it. By the time evening settled over the city, the private hangar no longer sounded like power. The Gulfstream sat under white maintenance lights with its stairs removed, its cabin dark, its polished body reflecting the empty concrete floor where crew members no longer waited for Bennett's command. 3 other aircraft rested beyond it in a perfect row, silent and unreachable, their tail numbers locked behind compliance codes, trustee approval, and the same legal language Bennett had once signed without reading. The fleet had not disappeared. It had simply stopped belonging to his will. Bennett stood alone near the yellow safety line, his suit jacket open, his tie loosened, his phone full of unanswered calls from New York, lender counsel, escrow coordinators, directors, and people who had once called him first because his name seemed easier than procedure. His executive keycard had already failed at the lounge door. His aviation account code had been disabled. His chief of staff had stopped saying, "your aircraft," and started saying, "the trust assets." That was the new language. Celeste was gone. She had left through the side exit after asking a driver to take her back to the city, carrying the same white coat she had worn onto Naomi's seat that morning. Only now it looked less like victory than borrowed costume. No one had stopped her. No one had needed to. The cruelty of privilege is that it teaches people to stay only while the door's still open. Across the hangar, the service entrance unlocked. Naomi entered with Evelyn beside her, followed by 2 compliance officers carrying slim folders and new access credentials. Naomi had changed nothing about herself since morning. Her dark suit was still precise, her expression still calm, her pace still unhurried. She did not look like a woman coming to admire damage. She looked like a woman arriving to collect what had always been documented. Bennett turned toward her, and for the first time that day, he did not begin with an order. "You got what you wanted," he said. Naomi stopped a few feet from the safety line. No, his eyes sharpened with exhausted anger. "You took my aircraft, my deal, my board, my credibility." Evelyn handed Naomi the final transfer receipt, stamped and filed. Naomi glanced at it once, then gave it back. "You misplaced them." The answer struck harder because it was quiet. Bennett looked past her toward the aircraft, as if the machines might still recognize him if he appealed to them directly. The hangar smelled of cold metal, aviation fuel, and the bitter black coffee someone had abandoned hours earlier in the operations office. On the wall screen, every aircraft remained marked administrative hold, trustee controlled, no dispatch authorization. Each line was a locked door. Bennett stepped closer, but not beyond the yellow line. Even now, the rules held him back. "You think this makes you untouchable?" he asked. Naomi's face did not change. No, she reached into the black folder and removed the old manifest from that morning, the one where her name had been removed and Celeste's had been added in its place. She placed it on a metal service table beside the new control transfer documents, letting Bennett see both papers together, the insult and the consequence. A whole marriage reduced itself to 2 records. Bennett stared at the manifest. "I was making a business decision." Naomi looked at the aircraft behind him, then back at the man who had mistaken humiliation for strategy. "So was I." He had no answer. The compliance officers began their work around them, replacing access permissions, verifying hangar restrictions, checking asset tags, moving through Bennett's former kingdom with calm professional indifference. Every beep of a scanner, every folder closed, every keycard revoked felt like a small burial for the version of himself he had sold to the world. He had built his image on speed, altitude, exclusivity, and the illusion that doors opened because he deserved them. Naomi had ended it by proving doors opened because documents allowed them to. Bennett's voice dropped. "After everything I built?" Naomi stepped closer then, close enough that he could see no anger in her eyes, only the polished edge of final truth. "You built the image, Bennett. I held the structure underneath it." The hangar went still. That was the sentence that took the last oxygen from his pride. Not because it was loud, because it was accurate. Naomi turned away before he could turn silence into pleading, before he could offer apologies dressed as negotiations, before he could ask what it would cost to buy back the dignity he had thrown away on the FBO apron. Evelyn walked with her toward the exit, carrying the filed documents that now mattered more than Bennett's name on any aircraft door. Outside, Naomi's car waited beneath the hangar lights. She did not board a jet. She did not need the sky to prove she had won. Behind her, Bennett remained on the ground, surrounded by a fleet he could see, admire, and remember, but no longer command. No engine started. The fleet had answered the signature that truly controlled it. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.